My name is Vicki Hines. I am the Chief Exec of One Walsall.
Mark Davis, Chief Executive at SCVO, that's Sandwell Council of Voluntary Organisations.
We have nearly 300 members from the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise organisations.
We're the umbrella organisation for Sandwell, which is sort of part of the Black Country, the area to the west of Birmingham, between Birmingham and Walsall, Wolverhampton, Dudley. Also a trustee of Black Country Together Charitable Incorporated Organisation, CIO, along with Vicki and counterparts in Dudley and Wolverhampton. So in the Black Country, sort of the area west of Birmingham, part of the West Midlands, we have Dudley, Sandwell, Walsall and Wolverhampton, all individual local authorities bordering each other, a lot of common issues and challenges, but lots of local interest as well. When we started, we were a community interest company, limited by guarantee. We've more recently just converted from a CIC to a CIO. And the organisation as a sort of the fifth organisation, as it were, within our local collaboration, I think it's important to say isn't a CVS, so it's not a council for voluntary service. It's no ambition to be that. It's really a vehicle for collaboration. It's about how we are able to bring in resources and funds to our voluntary sector for the Black Country. We recognise as CVSs we're quite sort of territorial. So in my role, I'm interested in Sandwell. I don't really want to work that much beyond the borders. But there are times when there is money available for the Black Country or for more than one area, and it's tricky for us to organise a bid and have a kind of credible bid. So Black Country Together is a way in which we can attract that resource, work together as CVSs, and importantly kind of foster collaboration across our borders and our boundaries with our voluntary sector as CVSs are also our frontline organisations.
Some of the strengths of that have been about the peer support that we're able to offer each other as the four CVS areas. And also, I suppose, in terms of the geography that Mark's talked about, obviously we've got Birmingham, but it's the fact that I suppose there's four smaller local authority area CVS areas, we're able to come together to have those conversations about what happens across the Black Country and see some of the benefits and how we can take those forwards, as Mark said, in terms of some of those funding opportunities that have come up for us.
And just in terms of the model, we do not employ anyone directly. So our staff are the kind of the aggregate of our four CVS teams. And when we want to get things done, we look within our teams and say, okay, who's got some capacity, who's best place to do that. And there is that phrase, isn't there? I'll see if I can remember. If you want to go fast, go on your own. If you want to go further, go together. And I think that is really, really important for what we're doing. And I think I'm probably not alone amongst Black Country trustees, Together trustees, in saying sometimes I'd like us to go a bit faster, but we go together. And I think that is a really, really important, that consensus. What we don't want to do is we don't want to fragment, we don't want to fracture. We also don't want to always agree with each other. Sometimes we need to take time to stop and think and listen. The tension between, or the temptation to bring a sort of chief executive in, as it were, who's going to move us really, really quickly, actually in a peculiar way would create, I think, quite a lot of risk, that the trust and the kind of moving together that actually we rely on, that is so critical to what we do, will be lost. So that's a kind of tension. I think we'll probably continue to live with that tension, but I think just to reiterate the important role of our four organisations, not just four CEOs, four organisations, for wider memberships. At the time, I think one of our ambitions or our hopes was around developing some traded activities as four organisations, all of us in different ways, CVSs, looking for diverse funding, do little bits of trading, often around kind of core purposes. But we did feel that moving from 1,000 local organisations in each area to 4,000 across the Black Country would give us a really good market, potentially to run some sort of traded activities at scale. And CIC, therefore, we felt was a better fit for that. I think in reality, we haven't had the time and the kind of the headspace really to explore that traded route.
We have a board and we include other trustees from our respective boards. So it's not just the CEOs who are on the board. We've actually got trustees from our wider boards on there as well.
Most of the money that has come into Black Country Together since it's set up is grant funding, and we were finding some practical difficulties around, shall I say, corporation tax, not wanting to be generating big profits and having to pay corporation tax on that, and it became a bit of a challenge for us. So we actually felt on reflection that it would be simpler for all concerned to be a charitable incorporated organisation, a CIO. Nothing more complex than that, but I think it's more familiar territory for us now to work with, and doesn't rule out the idea of trading, but I think it's a much better fit for the organisation we've become.
I think we've all got a combined vision in terms of how we operate. We all are very unique. We've got our own identities and what have you. I think the relationships that have built up over those sort of, from 2013, we've been able to work well. And even with the trustees, some who are quite new to working on this, they recognise the joint ambition, I suppose, really, that we've got.
I know somebody referred, I think with good humour, to our first agreement before we set up as a non-aggression pact. Actually for CVSs, it's always like any organisation, you look across the border and you wonder about the other organisations. Well, we've as organisations and as CEOs for as long as I've been around, and there's been others around longer than me, we've always had good relationships, and we recognise that we are to a strong extent kind of reliant on the strength of our neighbouring organisations. So there is an extent to which there's a positive opportunity to bring money in to work together. There's also something about managing risks for us as part of the sort of CVS movement, that we will support each other, maintain that sort of support, keep each other strong, and that helps us all. So the collective is useful, but it's also helpful for the individual organisations as well.
I started probably after this, but I'm just thinking, Mark, in terms of some of the opportunities, say like on the Building Better Opportunities programme, where I think as Black Country Together, I'm not sure we could have done that maybe on our own. That was an opportunity to work together around employment and skills, and about, again, bringing the sector together to work on a particular sort of theme, particular sort of issue. But we're all quite different in terms of how we do that. So I think the beauty is how that chemistry really of working across those four areas to deliver something that's really meaningful and impactful.
We've got very distinct communities and very distinct identities, even within any of our four local authority areas. Many residents have a really strong affinity with the place that they were born, the place they live. It isn't necessarily how they would relate to the local authority that they're in. So it is a really interesting place to work.
Over time, obviously, we've built our relationships up locally as well with lots of organisations. And I think there are, as Mark's alluded to, particular issues maybe within some of our geographical locations and what have you, which again, we can work together across some of those things.
We've been very clear and very firm, as have our memberships as umbrella organisations for years and years, that a Black Country-wide CVS would not work. It simply wouldn't work. It wouldn't be popular. It would be complicated. Also, what we have sort of developed our thinking, I suppose, as we set up Black Country Together, is to be really clear about the distinctive offer it brings. So it isn't a CVS. Yes, it can facilitate collaboration across the borders, as I've said, but it's not trying to replace CVS. It's trying to add value and do things that we are on our own individually can't do.
And what we might learn from this is about how we communicate that message about that impact. I think that's something that we are looking at, how we can be better at doing that in the future.
Vicki, I completely agree that one of the benefits of collaborative working has to be about articulating the benefit of working with the whole of the sector, rather than just working with parts of it or individual parts of local infrastructure. And it sounds like that as well has been a real success of the model that you found through working together.
Yes, definitely. I think even in the short time that I've been involved in Black Country Together, more and more, and I'll use the example around health and well-being, the conversations around prevention and about the power and the strength of the voluntary sector in that space, I think is recognised. I think as we for CVSs are trying to demonstrate that more and more in this arena where funding is more and more strained and under pressure, is recognising the benefit of working with the voluntary sector in that space, maybe further upstream, so you can save, make a cost saving maybe to services which are already in a lot, under a lot of strain, under a lot of pressure.
Of everything that was a factor for you, were there one or two key impetuses that really brought Black Country together, or was there one particular project that you took on that really sort of accelerated the partnership and made you feel, oh yes, we're here now. This is what we're becoming?
So the impetus really for Black Country Together, the thing that kind of suddenly made it happen, was an Arts Council England fund that was around in about 2010, launched in about 2010, called Creative People and Places. And this is all about how Arts Council will invest in areas of the country with very lower than average engagement in the arts and cultural life. The Black Country was one of their priority areas. I think a number of organisations came together with local authorities, put a bid in. Unfortunately, it failed, and there was quite a big risk that the Black Country was going to miss out on this money, which it desperately needed. And at that point, we were approached by a number of arts organisations and said, "Would you, as the CVSs, lead this? Could you work with us as local arts organisations and lead a consortium to bid for it?" And we were very keen to help. We felt it fitted our role very well. But we recognised again, learning from past experience, that we probably needed to have a separate company. So that was the thing, I think, that tipped us over, pushed us into very helpfully creating this company. We had about a year and a half, I think, of working up towards it. We had a kind of partnership agreement. We worked through the legalities of it, and we incorporated in 2013, early 2013, and got our Arts Council funding later that year. Without that, we may still be, perhaps just working around nibbling at little bits of collaboration successfully. But I think Black Country Together as a vehicle was then established, and since then we've pulled in other projects and other activities and diversified somewhat what we're doing.
I'm not sure we would have had that traction maybe if we'd been 4 individual areas trying to do that. I think that would have been really difficult. So it's beneficial, I suppose, really for some larger funders who maybe see the value of having this kind of vehicle, in larger areas, then to go through one vehicle as opposed to multiple. It helps them, but also to see the benefit as well across that kind of wider landscape that they're able to achieve.
From a funder perspective, I think there's a real assurance in having a partnership that's absolutely hardwired. We've got 4 CVSs working together for that particular project. We've also got 3 arts organisations who are part of the consortium. So it's a really firm foundation, and from a funder point of view, I think confidence is the thing it gives them above all else. So and I guess I recognise as well that even if the funder had said, we'll fund, I don't know, one of our organisations and we can do some collaboration through that route, I think it does mitigate a lot of the risk that you've got 4 organisations. We all go through our times of good fortune and challenge, and I think it's mitigated a lot of the risk of that for the Arts Council. That if my organisation or yours, Vicki, or either of the others go through a difficult time, it doesn't impact on that larger funded project. The important thing to recognise is that the kind of collaborative partnerships between the 4 CVSs in the Black Country are very, very long standing. They go back literally decades, and I think CEOs, as long as I can remember, have come together regularly. I think there is a lot that can be gained in terms of information sharing, peer support, mutual support, on all sorts of levels for those, for the CVS leadership. And there were a few instances where we ran projects that we said we'd take on together. And I think the challenge we had with that was, if, for example, my organisation in Sandwell took on a project for the Black Country, it's really hard for that not to be perceived as a Sandwell project. And that does undermine and dilute the kind of message there. So I think that was a real risk for us in terms of how can we do more of this, but in a way that feels genuinely collaborative and it is owned across the whole of the area. And I've mentioned before, we talked about trading projects, as shared ideas around that, and we did talk for some time around should we create a separate company to do that.
You've talked about very practical aspects and very, very logical aspects of kind of coming together, but there is a real identity around the Black Country as well, and I'm wondering how that plays out in your partnership, in your collaboration.
I think in terms of the Black Country, you've got 4 very proud areas, proud in terms of the history, but also proud in terms of their communities as well. Proud of that history, industrial history in Walsall. We're also proud of the heritage as well in terms of Walsall. And again, I think across the Black Country, you'll find similar sort of themes that run in terms of that. Interestingly, I think, and around that arts and culture theme, we have 4 cultural compacts that have formed, which were also established by the Arts Council a few years ago. But again, looking at those kind of individual area identities. But I think, again, we're looking at how we can kind of support one another across the 4 areas. There's not a huge amount of money, and you've probably seen in the press that for culture and arts, some of that funding has reduced significantly. So we're looking at alternative ways of bringing that to the fore, because we know arts and culture are really intrinsic to a lot of the areas that we're working in. We've got changing communities as well across the 4 areas. In Walsall, we see newer communities coming to the area. I think that's similar in the other 3 areas. It's about making sure those people feel part of or made to feel welcome. Part of that, arts and culture plays a role in that. They're bringing new cultures as well. So it's how we can kind of work together again as 4 distinct areas to really sort of bring that to the fore and to celebrate that. Once the announcement was made about decommissioning NHS England, we hadn't necessarily thought at that point what the implications were going to be locally. So we have or had a Black Country Integrated Care Board, and then there's Birmingham and Solihull Integrated Care Boards. There was then talk about clustering the ICB, so that's clustering Birmingham and Solihull with the Black Country. I think we are or were the second most deprived in terms of area, ICB area across the country. Obviously, looking at having a wider ICB going forward of this combined cluster, it's about maintaining or making sure that those issues that we have at the Black Country level are still understood and recognised. So I think what's happened so far is that the kind of governance issues around the ICB coming to, those 2 areas coming together, that's what's happening at the moment. But we are seeing obviously now a new governance structure starting to come together. I think also that the ICB is trying to take a different line. It's becoming more strategic in terms of its commissioning going forwards. So I think for us, it's trying to work out what will that mean for us as BCT, but also for the voluntary and community sector moving forwards. We've also got neighbourhood care, neighbourhood health that's happening as well. So that's again where a lot of that community service work is happening or starting to happen. The new models around that are happening. And again, for our 4 respective areas, that's happening separately, if you know what I mean. So again, we're looking at how we work together around lots of these new models of delivery, but obviously recognising the voluntary sector has a key role across all of that sort of new and emerging landscape that's coming to the fore.
The move from a Black Country footprint to a West Midland regional footprint is really challenging, and not particularly helpful, I think, for our local charities and our grassroots groups who were in some cases already struggling to get their head around a Black Country sort of health commissioning model. Now to have a West Midlands one, it feels very, very distant and remote. And I think there is a role for Black Country Together, but I should also say that we have had funding for the last sort of 6-7 years to bring organisations together through a voluntary sector alliance and some other initiatives. And that funding has come to an end with the change of ICB. So we're actually moving to a more challenging position for our local organisations at a time when Black Country Together's resource has ceased on that one. So I think it is really difficult. I think when with any kind of reorganisation, particularly for large health or local authority organisations, there's a natural kind of inclination to be very inward looking, as you'd expect for any organisation, and so the partnership element of that struggles because of that. So I think it is, as Vicki says, to some extent a time for us to reflect and watch and wait, but also make sure that our local organisations have some way to link into a future model.
For each area that has a Metro Mayor, they have quite specific areas of focus. For our combined authority, Metro Mayor, themes around youth unemployment is really high on his agenda, things like transport as well. We've obviously in the past looked at things like employment and skills. I think health is going to be more of a focus as well for the combined authority going forward. So again, there's a bit of a watching brief really in terms of what that looks like, what that means. I think sometimes the relationships between the combined authority and local areas, it can take a while, I suppose, really to develop. But I think that's an opportunity for us under Black Country Together to develop those relationships with key people within the combined authority, so we can develop those understandings of what sorts of things might be coming down the track.
One of the mistakes it's easy to make is to assume when we meet with people at that kind of regional level who may be hearing about us or meeting us for the first time, that they understand who we are, what we're about, how it's distinct from a local CVS model, which most people do understand and get from experience, and that they have a clear idea about the charity sector that we're supporting, because for many of the people in the sort of more senior roles, they will meet charity leaders of large organisations who have capacity to come to meetings, who get things done. We've got some fantastic large charities across the Black Country and the region, and that's great, and they're really important. However, the vast majority of our sector is small and grassroots, and the value they bring in terms of the reach and the way in which they work alongside with communities is really, really important.